All right, I pressed the button. All right, just in case you didn't know, this is Dr. Upal is in Healthcheck your site. And so you might be wondering, any of note takers in here? Note takers, raise your hand if you're a note taker. Okay, this presentation has links and it is already online at github.io. So please write down the URL right now. Give me a nod when you're done so that I can keep going with the presentation.
Can you turn the lights down the top, please?
I'll do that while everyone's writing things down. The mood lighting. All the dim lighting and the big green screen makes me feel like I'm in an IBM data center now. All right, we're good? Ready to go? Okay. So, you might be wondering, who is this weird person in front of you? Why are they speaking so loudly and shouting at you? And do they get this excited when they have a business trip? The answer is yes. I am Tess Flynn, otherwise known as Socket Wench. That's Wench, not Wrench. I am the module maintainer for Flag Friend, and for examples, and I am a DevOps engineer at a company called 10-7. 10-7 is a Minneapolis-based web agency. We create and care for Drupal-powered websites. If you have a Drupal project that you are working on or thinking about working on, give us a hi at 10-7.com. So, how many of us have said this before? But my site is fine. Every site is healthy until it isn't. Let's have a little bit of a story. Here's our stakeholder, and they're having a bad day already. So they're working on their site, and they're just wondering, what the heck is wrong with this thing? So they drag in the nearest poor developer in order to figure out what the heck is going on with their site. And they go and interrogate them, saying that the site feels slow and it feels off. I don't know what's wrong with it, but something is wrong. And the developer says, okay, sure, fine, we'll look into it. And then as they're walking away down the hallway looking all depressed and morose, they're going, but we've already looked into it, and we still don't know what's wrong with it. It would be really nice if we had some help. And this is where an auditor can come in and help you with your site. Because you don't really necessarily want the same person to examine your site, the one that works on it every day. They will bring in an outside perspective, and that's really important. Why do we need to health check our site? Well, there could be errors, breakage, malicious content gets posted. We might just have poor performance. Also, you might have a situation where you're working in your job one day, and then someone goes right over your cube going, so this new site here, this is your project now. Bye. Like a little bundle on your doorstep. Now you have a site, you have no idea what's going on with it, what its history is, or what it's about. You literally know nothing except the URL. What about situations like this? Your developer is working on your site, or you're working on your site, and you're wondering, wait, is it supposed to do that? And then you start getting this sinking feeling like, oh, I have a bad feeling about this. This is going to be a long day. A feeling isn't necessarily a health check, but it is a sign you may need one. Trust your intuition. It can tell you things that you might not be able to articulate just yet. Another situation that might happen, you might be working with a stakeholder and a developer are working together, and then you go, wait, are we sure we built this site the right way when we built it? I like calling this smoke testing. I cribbed this term from electrical engineering. It's when you create a new device, a new circuit, you plug it in for the first time, and you really hope that the magic smoke doesn't escape. I like it better than sanity testing because mine involves explosions. Basically, smoke testing lets you check if you're on the right path, and it can be difficult to check in-house. Having an outside perspective gives you a fresh look at everything that you're doing, so that you're not looking with internal logic at the site you're working on. Also, you might be going, well, I don't want to know if there's something wrong with it. That's never a good idea. It's better to know and plan if something's going on with your site than to just hope for the best. Because if you hope for the best, it gets a lot worse a lot quicker. Okay, you might be sitting there going, but Tess, I know, my site just works fine. But then you get that little bit of doubt going, well, I'm not sure if it's healthy yet either. Is there anything that I can do right now as I am sitting in this presentation listening to me yammer? The answer is yes. Let's check a few basics. All right, first and foremost, check for updates. I know, it sounds silly, but it's actually the simplest, most basic, most important thing that you can do for your site. It's not just if updates have been run recently. It's the social congruence around if updates are run regularly. That will tell you if your site is being maintained actively or if it's gone dormant and it hasn't received any updates recently. Also, you can use, to figure out if you need to do any updates, you can use the update report. Go to admin reports, available updates. You might not be able to find it. On some production sites, this is actually going to be disabled. You won't be able to access that report because you'll need to get the Update Manager module enabled. On some production sites, this is intentional. It may be disabled for performance reasons. How do you enable it? It's pretty easy. Go to Admin Extend, and then find the module, Update Manager, click it, click Save, and it gets updated. And now the nervousness really starts. Because now you're going, okay, I got it enabled. I'm at the reports page. I'm going to click the update button. Oh, that's not good. that's really that's really not good. So when this happens, don't panic. Your site will most likely not be a sea of green. Instead, you want to look for any red entries in the list. That includes security updates, updated unsupported modules. And then you want to take action as soon as possible. Action, not update. The reason why is that some sites intentionally will have out-of-date modules, because if they are updated, they may break the site's functionality. So always, 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 always ask your team first before you do any updates to know if there's any in-house knowledge about these blacklisted modules. Are there other things we can check? Sure, we can go to use the status report. This is also built into every version of Drupal. It gives you a nice overview of your site. You can go to admin reports status. Again, use it just like it's on the update report. Look for red entries. This will indicate misconfigurations if updates are required, or down connections to external services like Apache Solar. Next, you probably want to check your cache configuration. Again, this sounds silly, but a lot of small sites won't have caching configured correctly or at all. So go to Admin, Configuration, Development, Performance, and then what you want to do is you want to make sure that your CSS and JS files are aggregated, and then make sure that you have a maximum age set for the page cache. This depends on most sites. Most sites will need this, but if you have a higher order caching system like Varnish or Cloudflare, you may intentionally have this disabled. So always keep that in mind. Also, check the log. I know that also sounds silly, but don't look for specific errors in your log. Always look for the frequency of severe errors. You're looking for the shape of the errors that are coming from your site rather than specific ones. How do you do this? You can use the DB log module. It's enabled for most sites. You can go to admin reports, recent log messages to get a read of that. Is there anything else we can check? Well, let's see here. We can check bad practice modules, unused themes or modules, number 404s of the log, use cache and duplicated cut. Whoa. That's a lot of stuff. There's no way that we can remember all of this stuff. This is not the 1960s. We are not working at NASA. We do not have a stack of paper this tall telling us that we need to run through every step of the procedure. We work with computers. We want the computers to do the work for us so we can be lazy. So how do we do this in an easier way? Let's talk about automating our checks. There's a wonderful module called the Site Audit module. It gathers data and runs best practice tests against your site. You can find it at site_audit on Drupal.org. Now this is not a normal module. This is a drush command. So in order to use it, you will have to have drush available for you to run Site Audit. Drush is the command line tool for Drupal, and you can look at docs.drush.org to learn how to install it if it isn't already on your hosting. Once you actually have Drush working, installation is pretty easy. On Drupal 7, it's drush en-y site audit. And then you do a cache clear for Drush. And the reason why just Drush is because it is a Drush command, and Drush itself needs to be aware that the new command exists. Now, Drupal 8's a little bit more complicated because Composer gets involved. So you do Composer require Drupal/site audit, and unfortunately, due to an outstanding issue, this currently gets installed to the incorrect directory. So you're going to have to make directory Drush, copy and move the module from modules contrib site audit over to the Drush directory, and then do a Drush cache rebuild Drush. A few more steps, but that's everything you need to do. Once you have that done, you can now use site audit. So how does it work? From the command line, you want to change directory to the path containing your site, and then you want to run this command. Drush audit all. We want an HTML document as output. We want to use some fancy, pretty bootstrappy stuff. We want additional detail. We want to skip a Google Speed Insights report, and then we want to tell it, save it somewhere. Once that's done, we'll get a wonderful report that will tell us how compliant our site is against an ideal model. It's a really, really long page. So there's a lot of stuff in it. How much of this do we have to, read? So at the very top is the title and date. Now, I point this out because site audit only takes snapshots whenever it is run. It is not an active process. So having that date allows you to know exactly when it was run, and you can run site audit again in the future to get historical reporting. Then afterwards, there's going to be a section with summary and the % compliant by category. Then there's going to be a number of categories, and each one of those categories will contain details that are specific to the checks. And then there's a footer at the bottom. Now that just tells you the overall layout of this. If you ever want to navigate around, you can actually click any one of the summary by category. It'll jump you to the category in the document, and then you can jump right back from that section. So it has nice internal navigation as well. It's very easy to navigate. But there's still a lot of stuff on it. So what is it we actually really need to read? Well, I usually like reading all the best practice checks. There's a nice section which is just best practice checks. It's a really good idea to read every one that's in there. These are the highest value checks in the entire report. There's also one check on there that's called a services.yml warning. This is actually a false positive. It's technically correct that you can define your own services.yml in Drupal 8 today, but actually core Drupal services.yml is preferred. There is an outstanding issue to fix this particular problem. Then there's another section of the audit report called caching settings. This also gives you the best performance value for small sites. Again, make sure that you consider that cache minimum lifetime very carefully. And then there's a status and update section. These are just like the core reports that we've already gone over. But the advantage is that we didn't have to log into the site. We just used Drush and automatically consolidated it to another report for us. This replaces all those manual steps, so we don't even need to log into the site. Is there a whole bunch of other stuff that site audit can do? Sure. It can also do a lot of other checks like content checks. Usually, in my opinion, these are more FYI than actual problem finding. It doesn't really replace a content audit, but it will tell you the number of content types you have, the number of nodes associated with each content type, the number of fields, if there are fields unused, and so on. There's also a whole bunch of technical stats like the size of the file upload directory, the size of the Drupal code base, and also the database size by table. This may be useful for triaging problems, but it really depends on your site. Okay, so site audit's pretty great, but what if we can't run Drush? So right now there is actually a new version of site audit being developed, 8.3, which will work as a conventional Drupal 8 module. In the meantime, I've also been working on a little pet project of mine called the Healthcheck module. Now the Healthcheck module is not a Drush command, it is a traditional Drupal module, and it monitors your site continually. It's not like site audit. It will stay resident into your site and monitor it continually. It also is going to have pluggable notification systems. I said will because it's not finished yet. We're still working on it. This is the first time I'm talking about it publicly. This is what it looks like. We're just getting started with it. It has an action modality, so it always focuses on what you need to do, not what your site is. All right, that's enough of that. So now that we've run site audit or health check or whatever, and we're all done. We have everything we need to know about our site, right? Right? Ooh. That server is on fire. That's on. Let's talk about infrastructure checks. So the first thing I like asking people is not how much memory you have or CPU, but where are you hosted? Because there's a number of different kinds of hosting. Shared hosting, managed hosting like Pantheon or Acquia, or self-managed hosting on a virtual private server, or internally managed themselves. A lot of governments and medical organizations and schools will actually self-host their own sites. Then the next question I usually ask is, are you still happy with it? What was your primary motive when you chose this particular hosting? Were you motivated primarily by cost back then? Is that motivation still true? If it's not still true, are you open to thinking about moving elsewhere? Because that can affect how you proceed. The thing is, a lot of people aren't like me and not a colossal nerd, and they're not Linux wizards. So they're wondering, what can I actually check with simple command line tools that I can do right now? Well, the first thing I like also checking is if you have enough memory. There's a wonderful command within Unix called the free utility. And all this does is it shows you the free and available memory on any Unix server. So first of all, log into the server with SSH. Your hosting provider will tell you how to do this. And then you want to run the free command. So just type in free, and because it's Unix and they have to tell you bytes for everything, we use -h because we are humans and we need actual numbers that make sense to us. So we use free -h, and we get this huge line of stuff. Well, what we really want to look from here is the mem line. This tells us about physical memory, the fastest memory on the server. And you'll look, oh, there's 4.1 gigabytes free. That sounds right, doesn't it? Well, not entirely true. Linux, like most modern operating systems, actually cache a lot of things in the background. So what we really want to do is we want to read the number that's all the way over here, the available number, because that's going to tell us how much memory is actually not being actively used. And right now we have 9 gigabytes, so we're good. We've got plenty of memory. What about disk space? There's the df command, or the disk free utility, and it measures free space on the disk, not performance. It works pretty much the same way as the free command, df-h, and then it outputs a whole bunch of other stuff that is kind of confusing. The way to approach this is think, where is my site hosted on the server? If my site is at /www/html, I should be able to go and find where that is. It's not under /dev, it's not under /run, and it's not under /boot. So it's got to be on this second from the last here, because it's the only one that says mounted on / that can contain that path. And if we look at it, we can see we've got 270 gigabytes free. So we've got plenty of specs. We're good there too. What about CPU load? Now you can check this, but honestly, this is one of the least valued checks when it comes to infrastructure, in my opinion. You can do it using the top utility, and it will look for, and then look for the idle column or the ID column. It's named differently depending on the version of Linux/Unix you're using. It outputs a lot of stuff, and it doesn't quit automatically like the other commands. But what you really want to do is look at the top, and you'll notice there's 96% idle. Now you have to monitor this over time to kind of get a good idea of the CPU load, because this is instantaneous, not historical. So keep that in mind. When you're done, you can press the Q key to quit out of the command. All right, that's a lot of stuff. Do I really need to do this? If you're on managed hosting, you probably don't need to audit the infrastructure. And the reason why is because memory disk and CPU are typically auto-scaled for managed hosting, so you don't usually need to bother checking it. If you're on Pantheon or Acquia, don't really bother. On the other hand, if you're on pair networks, on shared hosting, or if you're on a virtual private server like Lineout or DigitalOcean, or if you're internally hosted, then you have to check, because you are actually resource constrained by default by the provider. So keep that in mind. The next thing I also check is also the PHP version. This sounds ridiculous too, but I've seen some amazing things recently. So if you're running Drupal 8, you should always run PHP 7. Please, for the love of the universe and the spirits of the four corners, don't run it on anything else. If you're on Drupal 7, try running it on PHP 7. If it doesn't work, use the most recent version of PHP 5.6. Never anything lower unless if you have a very good reason. Oh, and you might think, well, if this version of PHP is too old, I'll just upgrade it. Honestly, this happens very rarely. Most of the time what happens is that it's much better to coordinate an update to PHP with a server migration to new hosting. That's much more typical, and it's actually a safer process because you can check everything before you actually make the new version live. Also, there are two versions of PHP on every web server. There's one that is the one that Drupal uses when it's running on the web server, and there's one in the command line environment that Drush uses. Ideally, the major and minor versions should always match. If you're 5.6 on the web server, it should be 5.6 on the command line. The configuration between those PHP instances can differ, but it really should only be minor. So how do you check this? Checking web PHP, I do the simplest thing. I actually go right through the web UI and I use the status screen. It tells me exactly what version it is, and it's from the perspective of Drupal itself. It is by far the most consistent, most accurate way to check this information. What about the command line environment? Login via SSH, PHP -- version. And that will tell you what the PHP version is right there. So one thing you might want to be careful about is sometimes these versions can be mismatched. I have seen versions that have had 5.6 on the main web server running a Drupal 8 site and 5.4 in the command line environment. And just like last week, I found one that was 5.6 on the web server running a Drupal 7 site and then PHP 7.1 in the command line environment. It also had Drush 5, so that was fun. Important thing, as your site grows, you can outgrow your hosting. If you have bought a small hosting plan that was sufficient back then, you may have outgrown it by now. Always keep that in mind. You will change, your site changes, your requirements will change, and you need to keep that in mind if you want to stay with your current hosting provider. Okay. Now, stop me if you've all been guilty of this sin, because I've done it at least once. If I can only change this one line in core, and then you go ahead and do it. And of course, because you're an optimist and you're at work and you're on your second coffee and it's 3 p.m. on a Friday and you're feeling nice and spry and awake, you say, I'll just remember to remember that I did this the next time I update. And it's a lie. You completely forgot by next week. So let's talk about modding code. I like saying that if you, quote, hack core, it's really a mod on core. And the reason why is that you want to differentiate a mod from a malicious hack. So modifications are not malicious. Usually they're intentional modification of core and contrib code. Why do people do this? Why do they keep doing this? There's a lot of different reasons. Expediency, lack of knowledge, or even you might have come across a bug fix. Sometimes I run into situations where it is obvious that at some point there was a developer that was flailing like Kermit like Kermit the Frog, because they're desperately trying to squeeze more performance out of a stack that has a deeper underlying problem, and they left a hack, a mod in core for that reason. Often, a lot of the time, people aren't aware of the official patching process too. It's really important to patch your site, not to mod it. If you have to modify your site at all, post an issue and patch it if there's a broad benefit, or at least keep the .patch file in your site's repository. This allows that change to be tracked, and so that other developers can be made aware of it as soon as that occurs. There's also a right way to patch. For Drupal 8, you want to use the Composer Patches system, and that's going to allow, anytime you do a Composer build, to automatically repatch versions of code. It's really, really awesome. Also, you should probably refer to the patch on Drupal.org if at all possible. And the reason why is it ties it to an issue number so that you can track what the history is, and if you still need that patch going forward. Okay. Now, if you're an auditor, on the other hand, you have another problem. You could ask the team if mods were using the site. No one forgot. Okay, so work here. And use Git. Is there any other way that we can find this out? There is. It's called the hack module. The hack module compares installed contrib and core code to the same the same version on Drupal.org. It's version aware. It will know what version of Drupal you're working on, what version each module is, and it will compare it only to that version on Drupal.org. This gives you a baseline to determine if any code was modified. So when do you want to use this? I actually use it as a matter of course on any site that I audit, but particularly if you use FTP and not Git or CI to deploy your site, if you haven't updated the site in ages, or you possibly suspect that there is a security breach on the site. In any of these cases, it's a great idea to run this module. How do you install it? You can use Composer on Drupal 8, or you can use Drush on Drupal 7. It's really straightforward. Then you want to run this against the live site. And the reason why is the live site is actually the canonical source of truth. It will tell you what files the web server actually thinks it should be using, instead of the ones that are copied to your local environment. So it's important to do this against live. This tends to also unmask any untracked files or cloaked files, which are intentionally placed there to avoid detection from intrusion detection systems. How do you run the report? Go to admin reports hacked, let it run, and then you'll get the output. Hack module does have one Achilles heel though. It tends to give you a lot of false positives. Usually any minor change can flag a module. This includes missing readmes, line endings, and best practice changes. So I ran this against my own site and I had 723 files changed. This is a Composer-based website. I built this 2 minutes before I ran the hack module. All of these were line ending changes. This happens a lot with it. Always keep that in mind. But how do you get detailed reports, detailed results from the hack module? First, just install the diff module. Install it the same way that you do the hack module, and then this allows a hack module to display individual line changes within each modification. So here we ran it again after we installed diff module, and we noticed that the flag module has something different on it. So we click the View Details of Changes link. We'll get a list of all the code changes, and we find that flag service was modified. We click that, and we'll notice that it has been intentionally modified with a patch. There's even an issue number right there. So we can actually extract that and actually make it go official. So let's talk about going legit. Extract the patch from the changes, and then if you think there's broad benefit, post it to Drupal.org, or at least add it to your site's repository. Now, modding isn't really wrong, but you need to do it in the right way, because if you don't do it in the right way, it's going to cause you a load of pain. Okay. So we've done all of that so far. Now your stakeholder is going to go and post some shiny new content on their site. And then you're starting to go, wait, why is this taking so long to load? Is it just the Wi-Fi? Was this ad always here on the site? Why is it trying to redirect me? I don't want sunglasses. What's going on? And then it dawns on you. We might have been hacked. So let's talk about hacks. The way that I usually check for hacks on a site is to look for signatures. These are clues that I identify or imply if a hack has occurred on the site. A really common one for PHP web applications is this combination here, the eval function and base64 code. This is an excellent way to unpack and execute exploit code remotely. A lot of Drupal admins leverage this particular code snippet a lot to actually deploy malicious payloads. How do you check if that happened on your site? The hacked report actually can unmask this. I actually did find a duplicated module that had an exploit code embedded into it through the hack report. I missed that with site audit because it didn't check for the modifications to the code itself. You can also use the grep utility or an IDE or any other mechanism that searches a bunch of text files. Look for duplicate files and duplicate modules because those are particularly a good way to hide if code has been modified. Should we check the logs? I mean, honestly, you could. The problem is that Drupal's logging mechanism isn't as detailed as it could be, and it's really useful only to corroborate if a hack occurred, not to detect one. So don't spend more than 15 minutes digging through logs. It's really of low value. Okay. Also, one thing you might notice while looking through your logs is that the net isn't a clean place. Frequent drive-by attacks are incredibly common now on the site. How many of you have seen wp_admin.php in your logs? That is a drive-by attack mechanism. There is it is not the era anymore where there's a movie hacker sitting behind a laptop flailing on a keyboard trying to compromise your site. Now it's going to be foreign governments, malicious corporations, and cartels, which are going to spin out a botnet on Google Compute Engine or AWS to maliciously drive by any IP address they find possibly compromisable. So there's no one at the keyboard looking at your site trying to break it anymore. All it is a crapshoot trying to find some vulnerability. And if one happens, it auto-hacks it. No one's there at the controls any longer. They only get the results. For this reason, the logs are very, very messy, and they're going to contain a lot of these drive-by attacks. So keep that in mind when you're looking through the logs. Okay, you might have gone through your site, and then you realize, I need to break the news. So you take the stakeholder and the developer, you put them together and say, I'm really sorry, but you've been hacked. And then there's this pregnant silence for a moment while they're sinking this in. And then they're like, oh God, it's all over. Our site's destroyed. Our business is finished. What are we gonna do? This site's really good against Carmina Burana, by the way. You should try it out later. All right, once you've discovered that your site's been hacked, the most important, critical thing that you can do is not panic. You want to breathe, take a moment to accept that this is reality now. Once you've done that, what can we do? I usually tell people the very first thing you can do is pull the site offline. I don't care if you have 50 million customers. I don't care if you have users and SLAs that need to be met. Take it offline. And the reason why it is better to be offline than to be compromised, because you risk user privacy, partner exposure, and brand damage the longer your site stays up compromised. Take it down. Replace it with a static HTML page if you have to, but don't leave it running. Okay, next you want to back up the hacked site. Yes, really the hacked site, because you need a working copy to examine it. Then afterwards you want to place it in an air-gapped system that is not connected to the rest of your network, because you do not know what that site is going to try to do. Most Drupal sites are not like viral payloads. You don't have to be that careful with them, but it is a good idea to try to run it in a series of Docker containers or a VM or something that doesn't have underlying access to your operating system. Okay, then the next task is to figure out when you were hacked. This requires a degree of sleuthing. You might need to dig through the logs, try to tie it to a missed core or contrib security release. Those are usually good at instances when a site might have been hacked. Then you need to find a clean backup. You want to not just find a clean backup of the code, but also the file upload directory and the database from before the hack. You want to go back in time to when the hack did not occur. Make sure that these files are not compromised in any way. Rerun all the same checks to make sure that it behaves like you expect it to. Then you want to update that clean backup. Apply all security updates and patches. Copy any content over from the compromised site to the new clean copy manually. And the reason why manually is because automated systems might propagate the malicious code from one site to another. Do it manually and inspect it carefully so that you know that you're not copying compromised content. Then you want to back up that clean update again because you don't want to do it a second time. How many times I've done this before? I spent a lot of time updating it. Then my system crashes and the files are gone and I have to do it all over again. Don't do that. Don't make that mistake. Also keep in mind that you might need to look back at this later on because your site might still be exposed in other ways. What if there's no backup? You were on shared hosting, you expected the hosting provider to do this for you, or you were looking at your backup system and everything was fine and all of them are corrupted or empty. This happens, that's life. What do? Clean up what you can. And then you have to accept the risk that your compromised site will be vulnerable to follow-up attacks. It's going to be a game of whack-a-mole at that point, and it's going to take a long time to recover from it, but that's what you'll have to do. But then it gets worse. Because what happens if the server was compromised? What if they got access to the underlying operating system that the site was running on? My recommendation is throw away the server. Yes, really. Throw it away. Assume the whole thing is compromised. Discard every password, every key, the database password, SSH keys, every login credential, everything. Invalidate all Drupal user passwords, everything. Throw it away. And the reason why is you cannot be sure if that's going to be in a database dump somewhere on a BitTorrent site that can be used for malicious follow-up attacks or information stealing. Toss it all. Once you've done this, it hurts, it sucks, but it's really the most secure way that you can do it. I've had to do this myself, and it sucked. I hated it. Because I found out that my site was hacked at mid-camp one year. Also keep in mind, you will be hacked. There is no way to avoid this. The only thing that you can do is not stop hacks, but be prepared for the eventuality when you are. Keep your backups, keep your updates regular. Those are going to be your first line of defense to protect your site. Okay, so we've gone through, we sorted, updated everything, but we still have other stuff we discovered during the course of the audit. So we need to remediate all of those. Okay. So first we need to recover from the hacks and get them back to a clean state, then apply all security updates. Then really fix all the easy stuff. I know that sounds lazy, but honestly, this is going to be the most bang for your buck. Disable bad practice modules, make best practice config changes. We've already gone through all of this. They're small changes, but they make a huge difference in your site's performance. So make sure you do all the easy stuff first. There are some things that I specifically like pointing out, like statistics module. This makes a DB write on every request to a Drupal site. Don't use this. Unless you have a really good reason, don't use this. Use some other statistics analyzer. A lot of people will use Google Analytics or some other server-based analytics platform. Don't use statistics module. Also, there's another module called the PHP module. It's one of the worst named modules in Drupal because I like calling it the PHP filter module instead. Because what it does is it allows you to write PHP code, put it in content, and it actually gets executed. This is a terrible idea, and it is an instant security vulnerability. Don't use PHP module. It was enabled by default on Drupal 7. Don't use it. Disable it today. How do you uninstall it? You want to check to make sure that you're not using a PHP filter in any of your text formats. If you're not using Views PHP or any other module that might build upon this functionality, test for breakage, then uninstall the module. Also, another common problem is you might have tons and tons of revisions. Governments, schools, anything that regularly re-edits pages will have this problem. This will slow down content retrieval because you will have 5 or 6 times the amount of content per node than is actually necessary to display the content now. So you want to actually make sure that you prune this down. Usually in practice, revisions past the last 3 are low value. They usually give you, oops, I screwed up, and what was the version before that? That's how many versions you typically need. How do you get rid of those? I like using the node revision delete module. This allows you to limit the number of revisions by content type and will clean out old revisions for you. I have actually gotten databases down to 1/3 the size by using this. Use this module, it's very good. Also, you want to check out if there's any duplicate modules, because duplicate modules are a really big problem, especially if you're manually managing your site, because it can be confusing. Which module is Drupal using? You don't know. So you want to make sure that you remove those duplicates and enforce that there's only one copy of a module per site. It also can be a sign of a hack. We've already talked about that. How do you deduplicate modules? Remove the module, then use drush cache clear, cache rebuild, and drush updb. On Drupal 7, it's cache clear. Again, test this locally first. Some sites get a little cantankerous when you do that, but make sure that you test to see if it's going to be fine with that. Okay. What about another problem that comes up in audits? You might see a bunch of stuff in the doc root, like a whole bunch of PDF files, a bunch of symlinks to places that are a little weird. And in the worst cases, you might find like an entire React site or an entire static HTML site in your doc root. Having a messy doc root is not necessarily wrong, but it can create automation and composer problems further down the line. Try to avoid this if you can. Move this to the files directory and set up a .htaccess redirect so that you can actually move them out of the Drupal root and into your file uploads directory. Check your caching and aggregation settings. We've already talked about this too. Enable it for all sites. Consider your maximum lifetime very, very carefully. All right, that's all the easy stuff. But you might think, the site's just still gosh darn slow. What's going on with it? Is there anything else slowing it down? Well, the honest truth is that an audit is not a performance analysis. It requires a different set of tools and different set of approaches. It is a very time and brain-intensive process to do a performance audit. You can use things like the Devil module's web profiler. That's a really good way of getting a general idea on the performance of your site and where your bottlenecks might be. You could use Xdebug profiler, but that is a huge golden hammer and it's very, very time consuming. So it's important to know that a performance analysis is usually a separate process from an audit. But when you're remediating a site's changes for an audit, remember that it's a process, not a fix. You may not be able to deploy all of these solutions. You might have to settle for the best out of 5, for example. But there's still more. We cleaned out all the hacks, we fixed all the bad practice modules, we've got everything caught up, and it's still not working well. Now what? When you start looking at it, you might go, wait, why was the site built this way? Well, you see, mistakes were made. It's not really broken, but it's not really working well either. This usually is the result of a successful remediation process. When you get to this point, that's actually a good sign. It means that you've actually fixed all of the things that you can fix easily, and now you're onto the hard stuff. And it might not be easily improvable. It might take a lot of work, and it might not be worth the cost investment as well. Why does this actually happen? Why do we still have problems with sites after we remediate all this stuff? Well, it's because of inexperience. We might have made some bad assumptions when we actually wrote the site. There might have just been changing priorities and how the site actually is used or put together. All of those can be good reasons why the site might not be performant now. As your site as you change, your site needs to change with you. You need to change with your site needs to change with you. And the reason why is because your priorities will change over time. Your needs will change over time. Your audience will change over time. And as a result, your site should change with you. So what are some common problems? This is a really good one. Too few content types. You've got articles and basic pages everywhere. There's a lot of sites which are like this. And another symptom of this is you might have tons and tons and tons of fields on nodes, but almost none of them are used. A very few, minimal number of fields are used. This is usually a symptom that you have too few content types on your site. You might also have the opposite problem. You might have too many content types on your site. There's differentiation only in name, not use or data. What's the difference between a press release, a blog post, and a news post? You think about it for more than 2 minutes, there isn't one in most sites. Why do we have 3 different content types for the same thing? And that's when you start thinking, the thing is that content problems, they're really common, but they can be fixed. You can do a content audit. Usually this is inventory of all types and content. It's a slightly different process than doing a technical audit. You can also rethink your content strategy, drop old irrelevant content, and use card sorting to discover groupings all over again. You can then merge and split different types by using the migrate module, or you can use per node tasks via fuse bulk operations. That's another very successful formula. And then reorganize the site, update the menus, build new sections. Use Path Auto, the redirect module, to make sure that you keep your SEO juice flowing. Once you have then, you might come across another problem, which is also really, really common on Drupal sites. Why is the body field just so huge? There are tons of HTML tags enabled on this. Why are there so many of them? Why are we using full HTML for everything? The thing is that one thing that Drupal is a little bit difficult for some people is that it's not very good at doing layout when you don't know the entire Drupal ecosystem. A lot of people will use content to do layout. It gives the site a messy, inconsistent feel, which becomes very apparent if you ever try to do a theme update on the site. Suddenly, the fact that there's a table in the content suddenly looks completely wrong, and it needs to be completely rebuilt. For this reason, I like recommending to people to use layout managers. These separate the layout from the content. There's lots of different options available. Find one that works for you. I like paragraphs, but there's also panels, block visibility groups, the brick module, tons and tons of different ways to approach this. Sometimes the problem is also more than just content. You might also have custom implementations of code. A contrib module might have been available, but wasn't used for some reason. Maybe it wasn't updated, or maybe it had some critical feature it didn't have. So they decided to write their own when you discover it. This becomes a problem, because now that it's no longer out in the world, no one else is looking at it but you. Which means that no one else is helping you do security reviews, doing updates, making sure that this module is actually secure and functions properly on your site, that there are no performance implications. Sometimes also, there is overuse and abuse of a particular feature. This causes gradual performance loss, and it's usually what happens with things like node revisions. It's a simple thing, but it slows down the site slowly over time until it reaches a breakpoint where you start noticing it and then you can't unnotice it. Often this happens because you're unaware or it's unintentional that the site was configured this way, that lack of training was done when it was handed off from whoever produced the site to whoever operates the site. Or even over time, as the team that manages the site changes personnel. This information could have simply been lost. So can this all be changed? Honestly, yes. If it's an isolated feature, it's actually fairly easy to replace. It might take some time, but you can do it. But if it's a fundamental or an essential feature of the site which is used everywhere, you might just want to accept the fact that this is going to be a problem for this site. And in that case, you probably want to try to deprecate its continued use as much as possible. That will limit the impact, but it doesn't necessarily remove the problem. And that's when you start wondering, is it time to start thinking about a new site? There's lots of different reasons. Your current site code might be unsupported. It might be cheaper or easier to rebuild the entire site than to fix it. And sometimes people will just go, yeah, it's time. It's time for a new site. This happens. And sometimes an audit is a good opportunity to examine that question a lot more deeply. Rebuilds can also be easier on staff because it's the rip the bandage off quickly approach. So instead of waiting and instead of doing gradual changes which slowly infuriate people, you just wait until the entire site is new, and then everyone is in the same frustrating bucket together. They know that the site is new. Everyone has to be patient because it's a new learning experience for everybody, but they'll get through it together. So doing that all at once sometimes can be easier. Also, you can enforce best practices from the start. And you can also coordinate this with a hosting change so that you can get newer technologies or third-party services that you couldn't get before on your existing hosting. These are really a good opportunity. Okay, but also when you're considering building a new site, try not to build it alone. You really should bring in external help on a rebuild because it brings in an outside perspective and broader experiences than you may have in your internal team. And that can be valuable in of itself. It's not necessarily the technical expertise that you're paying for. It's the broader expertise of building different kinds of sites that is the most useful. I usually like asking a web agency that I'm looking at for a prospective rebuild, do they do an audit? It's a great get to know each other exercise. And it informs better estimating because now the agency has existing experience with your site. They know the complexity. They have some idea what your audience is and what your goals are. So having a prospective agency do an audit is actually really important. Here's the prefectory marketing slide, by the way. 10.7 actually does audits. We have flat pricing. I believe for DrupalCorn it is $2,500 for an entire site audit. We'll do any different Drupal site. We'll do analysis recommendations. I can give you one quick perspective on this. This is actually an audit document that we performed, and you can see how long it is. We get a little bit detailed. Okay, enough with the marketing. Whenever you do a site audit, it's important to also look to the long term because fast fixes bring brief benefit to your site. All right. Before I finish, I want to say a special thanks for DrupalCorn for having me today, for Tim Plunkett at Wiz1 Solutions, which helped me out with this presentation, for 10.7 for helping me be here today, and also my wonderful patrons on patreon.com/socketwrench. You can find this presentation on github.io.